Welcome to the Tim Booker channel, where wisdom is worth spreading. Wishing you a pleasant listening experience. Today, I'm going to interpret for you a highly thought-provoking book titled Noise. Why do I call it thought-provoking? On one hand, it's because the content of this book is undeniably challenging, not your typical light reading. On the other hand, after reading this book, you'll feel like your mind has undergone an intense process of refinement, becoming sharper. So, why the term intense process of refinement? The answer lies in the book's title itself. The subtitle of this book directly defines the main title, Noise, stating that it is a flaw in human judgment. In the author's words, where there is judgment, there is noise. Often, people make poor decisions or judgments because they overlook the influence of noise. The author's purpose in writing this book is to help us reduce noise in our decision-making processes, making us smart decision-makers. This, in essence, is the process of refinement. The first author of this book is the renowned 87-year-old behavioral psychologist Daniel Kahneman. He excels in merging psychological and economic research and was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2002. Kahneman has dedicated his career to understanding why people make errors in their decisions. You might remember that I've previously interpreted his 2011 book, Thinking, Fast and Slow. This book is not only a classic in behavioral economics but also consistently ranks among the bestsellers globally. Today's book, Noise, co-authored by Kahneman and two others, was released in 2021. In it, they argue that errors in human judgment result from biases and noise. While Thinking, Fast and Slow delves into the roots of biases, this book analyzes another factor affecting decision-making, noise. The two additional authors are impressive as well. One is Cass R. Sunstein, a Harvard professor and former head of the White House Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs during the Obama administration. The other is Olivier Sibony, a professor at the Paris School of Economics and a senior partner at McKinsey, both of whom have collaborated with Kahneman on research. Before we dive into the interpretation, I want to emphasize that this book is incredibly information-rich, covering the meaning of noise, principles behind noise generation in various predictions and judgments, types of noise, measurement, and ways to reduce noise in various scenarios. In today's interpretation, I will extract what I consider the most critical content that closely aligns with our everyday practices and share it with you. The upcoming audio will be divided into 3 parts. First, let's define what noise is. Next, we'll break down the components of noise. Finally, we'll explore ways to reduce noise in decision-making. Alright, now we're entering the first part. In the book, the author uses an example of machine gun target practice to explain what noise is. To help you better grasp the essence of the book in an audio environment, I'll use an adapted jungle maze scenario to help you understand the meaning of noise and how it differs from bias. Imagine you're participating in a jungle maze competition with your friends. The participants are divided into 3 teams to explore the jungle maze. Each team consists of 5 members, and you're in the 3rd team. During the competition, everyone needs to reach the center of the maze as quickly as possible. After 8 hours, the team with the most people in the center wins. If the numbers are equal, the timing will determine the winner. At the start of the competition, the first and second teams chose to move as a group, while your team opted for a scattered approach. You agreed that the first one to reach the center would send a location signal, and the others would follow that signal. You encountered difficulties right from the beginning and made little progress. Around 6 hours in, a friend sent a location signal, and you and others rushed in that direction. However, with numerous twists and turns in the maze, none of you made it in time. After 8 hours, the results were announced. The first team had all reached the center, the second team had strayed off course and ended up in the southwest corner together, and your team had 1 person in the center, with the other 4 scattered throughout the maze. Consequently, the first team won. Now, I'll use this competition to explain some important concepts from the book Noise. First, it's undeniable that if the first team represents an ideal judgment result, both the second and third teams undoubtedly made judgment errors. When we usually talk about judgment errors, we generally refer to discrepancies between the judgment and the real or ideal situation. The author tells us that these errors actually consist of 2 parts, bias and noise. Bias is a systematic error where everyone leans in one direction, just like the second team all heading toward the same corner. On the other hand, noise refers to the unpredictable variations in judgments, like what happened with the third team members, who all made different decisions and went in various directions. In reality, if all the doctors in a department diagnose a patient with eye discomfort as merely a result of staying up late recently and it turns out to be an eye tumor, that's a bias in judgment. But if one doctor says it's a tumor, another says it's from staying up late, and another attributes it to the side effects of a medication, that's noise in judgment. Although we discussed noise and bias separately earlier, the author points out that when we make judgment errors, it's often a combination of both bias and noise. To illustrate this, let's return to the jungle maze with a simplified example. If your team members are all afraid of the dark and, as a result, instinctively head towards well-lit areas in the jungle maze, you do the same. However, on that day, you happened to be a bit hungry and saw an apple tree on one path, so you turned into it without hesitation. In this case, your judgment deviated from the correct path due to the influence of the fear of the dark, bias, and the apple tree noise. This example highlights the fundamental difference between bias and noise. First, bias is not an irregular error, it's a predictable irrationality, a cognitive bias in the brain. For example, no matter which day the jungle maze competition is held, your team members are always afraid of the dark, and you could anticipate this beforehand. Therefore, Kahneman's key insight is that bias is foreseeable, and the fundamental method to eliminate bias is to understand bias. In reality, there are many familiar cognitive biases, such as people often focusing on short-term gains while ignoring long-term goals, forming preconceived biases based on first impressions, selectively absorbing external information, and remembering only the viewpoints they agree with, among others. However, when it comes to noise, you'll find it's irregular and unpredictable. In the jungle maze scenario, you would only realize you were suddenly a bit hungry on the day of the competition, leading you to the apple tree. Another team member might have been distracted because he had a morning argument with his girlfriend, affecting his judgment at a junction. These situations are irregular and could not have been foreseen in advance. So, if bias is regular and predictable, and noise is irregular and unpredictable, does that mean we can simply accept and live with noise? This book reminds us that it's not the case, as judgment errors caused by noise in real life can have very serious consequences. The book also provides numerous real-world examples. For instance, in two similar cases of embezzlement, one person received only 117 days of imprisonment, while the other was sentenced to 20 years. Faced with the same bank robber, one judge sentenced them to 5 years, while another judge handed down an 18-year sentence. Moreover, two men who committed the same offense of cashing counterfeit checks with only a small difference in the amount cashed were sentenced differently, with one receiving a 15-year prison term and the other just 30 days in jail, and so on. These judgments may be a minor difference for the judges but can profoundly impact the fate of those involved. Apart from the legal field, the impact of noise can also be seen in many aspects of life. Different interviewers often evaluate the same applicant very differently. There are significant variations in skill evaluations and management assessments of the same employees among different managers. Different doctors may make different judgments about whether a patient has skin cancer, heart disease, tuberculosis, depression, and other illnesses. Even in fields where noise shouldn't exist, such as interpreting X-ray reports or analyzing fingerprints, there is a significant amount of noise. Based on the extensive empirical research presented in this book and in Thinking, Fast and Slow, the author proposes two critical points. First, wherever there is judgment, there is noise. Second, noise and bias together lead to errors in our decision-making and judgments. To better understand the second point, let's use a formula. The author points out that for a single judgment, the error equals bias plus noise. However, when it comes to multiple, repeated judgments for the same matter, the overall error equals bias caret 2 plus noise caret 2. You don't need to remember these formulas, but it's important to understand that they convey the idea that if you want to improve the accuracy of your judgment, you have two options: reduce bias or decrease noise. Furthermore, both options have an equal impact on accuracy. Next, let's delve deeper into noise and understand its components. We'll step out of the jungle maze and into a new scenario, based on a real research study conducted on federal judges in the United States. Researchers designed 16 fictional cases and interviewed 208 serving American judges. During the interviews, they presented detailed case documents to the judges and asked them to make rulings. First, let's assume that in a perfect world, there should be no noise in the sentencing of judges. In such a world, all judges should have identical sentences for the same case. Unfortunately, the real world is not perfect. Empirical results show significant variations in sentencing by judges for the same case, indicating the presence of noise in each judgment. According to the calculations in the study, the overall systematic noise was 3.4 years, meaning that, on average, judges' sentencing for the same case differed by approximately 3.5 years. This result is quite unsettling because, in the real world, it implies that someone could serve several years more or less in prison depending on which judge presides over their case. Now, let's break down this overall systematic noise and examine its components. I'll provide a preview that there are three main components, and we'll discuss them one by one. The first component is called level noise. It primarily refers to the varying degrees of strictness among different judges. Some judges tend to be stricter than the average in all cases, while others may be more lenient. The differences are rooted in the judges' backgrounds, life experiences, political inclinations, biases, and other factors. These factors influence the judge's overall perspectives on sentencing, irrespective of the specific case. Thus, they result in variations in the consistent strictness of different judges compared to the industry average. These differences are known as level noise. The author points out that any judgment involves some degree of level noise. For example, when conducting performance evaluations, some supervisors may be more lenient than others. In forecasting market share, some predictors may be more optimistic than their peers. So, we've now extracted a portion of the systematic noise, called level noise. Now, let's move on to the second part, which has a name too, pattern noise. This component refers to a scenario where a judge is typically strict but becomes more lenient when dealing with criminals in the art industry. Another judge may generally lean toward lighter penalties but is stricter when handling repeat offenders. Some judges may maintain a consistent level of leniency compared to the industry average but are more lenient with accomplices and harsher on those who harm the elderly. You see, this adds complexity to what we discussed as level noise. Level noise pertains to the consistent strictness of a judge compared to the industry average, while pattern noise concerns the difference between their specific behavior in one case and their typical style. It's important to note that these differences are not random but stem from a judge's personal sentencing philosophy or even associations they may not consciously be aware of. For example, the defendant may remind the judge of a particularly abhorrent criminal, or the victim may trigger memories of the judge's own parents, and so on. Regardless of the reasons, we can assume that if the same case were re-examined, the judge would react similarly. Therefore, these reactions have become a behavioral pattern within the judge, triggered when certain conditions are met. The book calls this type of noise, pattern noise. Alright, now we've broken down the entire system noise into two parts, level noise and pattern noise. Some of you might wonder, didn't you mention 3 components earlier? Why are there only 2 now? Don't worry, you might have noticed that when explaining pattern noise, we mentioned that it arises from a stable behavioral pattern within judges. This is because the research participants were experienced, professional judges. Their views on various criminals and cases had formed stable patterns that didn't change with specific circumstances. For instance, if a judge consistently gives harsher sentences to those who harm the elderly, even if they had an argument with an elderly family member the night before, their sentencing pattern wouldn't change. Also, even if a judge's child ranked first in their grade one day, they wouldn't become lenient when making rulings the next day. At least, most professional judges could maintain this consistency. However, in reality, ordinary people tend to change their behavior patterns due to specific circumstances. For example, you usually give $1 to beggars, but today, feeling good because your stocks went up, you gave $5. Or if you're a human resources manager who had a big argument with family in the morning, and as a result, you had a bad mood all day, you might reject all interviewees. These differences in decision-making due to specific circumstances are referred to as situational noise. Situational noise can also affect many professionals. Empirical studies show that when professionals are in different situations, they are likely to make different judgments about the same facts. For example, fingerprint identification experts often arrive at different conclusions when examining the same fingerprint several weeks apart. Experienced software consultants may provide significantly different estimates for the completion time of the same task in two different situations. In these empirical cases, the subject and object of judgment haven't changed, but different circumstances led to variations in the final judgment. All of these fall under situational noise. Situational noise is essentially a branch of pattern noise. In the book, the author divides pattern noise into stable pattern noise and situational noise. Stable pattern noise is what we described earlier, arising from people's consistent behavioral patterns unrelated to specific circumstances. Situational noise, as the name suggests, results from changes in specific circumstances. In summary, a complete system noise can be broken down into three components: level noise, stable pattern noise, and situational noise. After listening to these various types of noise, you might feel that dealing with noise is a very complex task. Don't worry, the reason we've broken down system noise is to help you understand the noise generation process and recognize how ubiquitous it is. However, as mentioned earlier, when noise actually occurs, it's unpredictable and irregular. So, when making judgments, you can't clearly identify which specific types of noise might affect your judgment. The author believes that, for this reason, reducing noise in judgments requires comprehensive prevention beforehand. This means improving the decision-making process as much as possible to minimize noise in the final judgment. So, how can we improve the decision-making or judgment process? According to the book, the first step is to consciously improve your cognitive style. What's a cognitive style? In simple terms, it's your preferred style when thinking and evaluating various issues. Cognitive styles are diverse. Some people enjoy brainstorming and pondering complex issues, while others prefer not to. Some make intuitive judgments, while others require careful analysis. Additionally, some individuals have strong critical thinking skills, while others are more prone to taking things at face value, and so on. According to current psychological research, these different cognitive styles correlate with judgment effectiveness differently depending on the task. For instance, for some judgments, thinking more may be better, while for others, it's best not to overcomplicate things. Is there a cognitive style that consistently affects judgment accuracy? Indeed, there is: a positively open-minded mindset. It involves a willingness to actively seek out information that contradicts your own views, essentially being open to alternative perspectives. Even if I believe something, I'm open to hearing opposing opinions, and during this process, I continuously adjust my thinking and beliefs based on new information. Research shows that this kind of open-mindedness is crucial for enhancing judgment accuracy, and it can be learned. The author suggests that, whether you're a leader or an average individual, after initially making a judgment, it's best to consciously remind yourself that your judgment might be wrong and to be open to opposing views. If you decide to stick with your viewpoint, it should be after hearing various opinions rather than beforehand. An open-minded individual is likely to have much better judgment than those considered smart. So, besides improving cognitive styles, is it possible to use some external tools to enhance judgment accuracy? The author indeed provides some methods in the book, and what's most interesting is that he combines some widely applicable methods into a strategy called the mediating assessment method. Next, we will break down this methodology step by step using a corporate merger scenario. Imagine you're the newly appointed CEO of a food company, and you're planning to acquire the neighboring John's bread factory. You recently learned about this mediating assessment method and decided to apply it to transform your company's decision-making process. The first step is decision decomposition. In this step, your company's team needs to clarify the most critical evaluation dimensions related to acquiring another company. After discussions, you identified 7 dimensions: John's bread factory's profitability, the quality of its management team, its product innovation capability, and the synergies that the acquisition can bring, among others. These 7 dimensions are your key concerns in this acquisition, and they don't overlap. The author calls them the mediators in this decision-making process. Now, the second step is mediating assessment. In this stage, you need to evaluate each mediator you identified earlier. The most crucial aspect here is adopting an external perspective. What does an external perspective mean? In the author's words, it means ensuring that assessments are as comparable as possible. For instance, when evaluating the profitability of the bread factory, it's not enough to rate it as good or bad, you need to compare it with similar companies to see where it stands. Your final assessment should look like this: for instance, considering the last 2 years' profit data, the company's profitability ranks in the top 40% among similar companies. The author suggests that relative judgments like this are superior to absolute judgments like good or bad. When assessing mediators, it's essential to separate and conduct each assessment independently. For example, assign 7 different assessors, each responsible for evaluating one mediator, with no communication allowed during the process. This separation prevents assessments from influencing each other. For instance, if you've already assessed the company's profitability and felt it was strong, when you assess the quality of the management team, you might have a preconceived positive bias, which could impact your judgment. At the end of this second step of mediating assessment, you should have a report for each mediator. Each report focuses on one mediator assessment and includes all factual information about the assessment, ending with a score. Next is the third step, the decision meeting. You must convene a board meeting to vote on the evaluation report generated in the previous step and make the final decision. Before the decision meeting, you reviewed the evaluation report and noticed significant differences in the scores. For example, profitability received a score of 9, product innovation capability scored 6, and management team quality only received 4, among other variations. However, you understand that these differences are the natural result of keeping the assessments independent. Diverse results might not make decision-making easier, but they make it better. During the decision meeting, you suggest that the board follows a decision process involving an initial assessment, discussion, and a second assessment. Specifically, each board member thoroughly reviews the evaluation material and assesses each mediator independently. Each member gives their own score, which can match the scores in the evaluation report or differ. The distribution of scores for each mediator is immediately displayed on a screen, without revealing who provided each score, to maintain the independence of opinions. Then, the meeting proceeds to the discussion phase, where your main task is to guide the board to spend more time discussing items with discrepancies and ensure that members with differing views speak up, encouraging them to present their viewpoints with facts and evidence. When the discussion approaches its conclusion, board members re-evaluate each mediator. Finally, it's time to reach a conclusion for this acquisition. Now, in front of you, there's a large table displaying each board member's scores for each mediator. How should you make the decision? Initially, you might consider taking an overall average or conducting a full average. However, the author tells us that at this point, instead of using specific calculation formulas to derive results, it's better to rely on everyone's intuition and have a show of hands to vote directly based on the entire table. The primary reason behind this approach is that any formula is a deterministic rule, and when making significant decisions, once people know that such a rule exists, they tend to unconsciously consider how their scores will influence the outcome. As a result, some individuals might provide scores that don't truly reflect their beliefs just to steer the decision toward their preferred direction. Therefore, the author suggests that at this stage, it's better to abandon all rules and rely on everyone's intuition. Furthermore, the author points out that using intuition at this stage is different from using it at the beginning because after going through a lengthy and objective assessment process, participants' minds have already achieved relative synchronization at the information and factual level. Consequently, their final decision will be based on these facts. After the final results come in, if someone wants to oppose the decision, they would need to present more compelling evidence. Following this logic, the board evaluated, discussed, re-evaluated, and then voted on this acquisition. In the end, the board made the decision to support the acquisition of John's Bread Factory. Thus, this major decision was successfully completed with minimal noise. The mediating assessment method presented above is a combination of strategies. The beauty of it lies in the flexibility to either use its individual components or employ the complete combination at crucial moments. The author points out that both organizations and individuals, when needing to balance multiple dimensions of information to evaluate options or plans, can draw inspiration from these strategies in the mediating assessment method to reduce noise in judgment and decision-making. Here, the key content of the book, Noise, has been explained to you. In summary, in the first part, we discussed the book's most important point, which is that noise and bias together lead to errors in our decision-making and judgment. To improve the accuracy of judgments, we can choose to reduce bias or decrease noise. Both have an equal impact on judgment accuracy. In the second part, we talked about the three components contained in system noise: horizontal noise, stable pattern noise, and situational noise. In the third part, we discussed how to reduce noise in judgment results by improving the decision-making process. Besides improving one's cognitive style and fostering open-minded thinking, we introduced a combination of principles called the mediating assessment method. This method includes many principles that can reduce decision-making noise. For example, decision decomposition involves breaking down complex judgments into a series of smaller tasks, preventing contamination from different aspects of a judgment problem affecting each other. This reflects the principle of structuring. Mediating assessment requires that evaluations for each small task be conducted separately and independently, avoiding the influence of evaluators' opinions or other projects. It also emphasizes making evaluations as comparable as possible, reflecting the principles of independence and an external perspective. In the decision meeting stage, we didn't initially rely on intuition but led everyone through multiple rounds of evaluation, discussion, and balancing based on factual information before making an overall judgment based on intuition. This demonstrates the principle of resisting premature intuition. In the book, the author goes into further detail about these principles that help us reduce noise. If you're interested, you can read the original book. At the end of the book, the author points out that in a world with less noise, we can save significant resources, improve public safety and health, provide fair treatment to people, and prevent many avoidable errors. This is the direction our society is striving towards, and it's an opportunity that every intelligent decision-maker faces. This book, Noise, reminds us that we should not only focus on these opportunities but also continuously refine our decision-making processes to enhance judgment accuracy and seize these opportunities. That concludes the essence of this book. Congratulations on completing another book. Thank you for your support and attention. Please subscribe to the Tim Booker channel. Give it a thumbs up and share it with your family and friends. Wisdom is worth spreading, paving the way for a brighter future. Thank you, and goodbye.